Yeah, we're on the countdown. Oh, we're there. We landed.
We are live. We are live.
We're alive.
So nice. So, hi, Justin.
Good
Nice to see you again. And Happy New Year, my friend. It's really.
Well, you know, I promised someone earlier in the day that I wasn't going to say that again this week. But I guess because I haven't seen you, I can say Happy New Year. So, Happy New Year.
So now you broke your promise?
Roberto,
Already?
okay, that's it. Okay, no more. That's
the type of character we're dealing with. Somebody who's not keeping his word. It's a tough choice, right? Do I say Happy New Year?
Yeah.
Or do I break my promise? Yeah, it's a difficult one. No, so thank you.
Well, out of courtesy to you. Not dismissing the promise to someone else, but out of courtesy to you.
Nice. No, I wanted to take this time to just talk a little bit about, I won't say random stuff. I have some questions for you. But before we get into it, I actually would like for you to just do like a short intro to, who you are, but more importantly, what do you do at Sandler, just so people know, who you are.
Brilliant. Well, thanks. I feel like I'm in the green room. You know, it's kind of the
almost. It's the exam time. Who are you, Justin?
Yeah, exactly.
And what do you do at Sandler?
Yeah. Well, as you know, Sandler's a global network of trainers and coaches, and my business partner and I, Chris Janelli, we own the London business, and you know, Robert, how CEOs who have a responsibility of growth, right? They have a responsibility of generating growth in their business,
amongst other things, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. But that's their primary one. That's right. It tends to be the one that they are most concerned about. And of course, the enablement of that is a combination of all sorts of things. But when we're talking with CEOs and they're frustrated that they're not growing at the pace that they want, and perhaps they're not getting the right traction with the type of businesses that they want to be engaged with. And fundamentally, it comes down to whether their sales organizations are operating efficiently and effectively to manage and get in front of those new opportunities. Well, that's the kind of thing that we help with. So it really is about working with sales organizations and sales leadership to fundamentally put in a methodology of approach from a sales perspective, fueled by a defined language that enables a common perspective within a sales organization to operate systematically, to operate with a repeatability, to operate with a structure that gets them to clarity of outcome much faster, much more efficiently.
So one of the reasons I want to talk to you and why I enjoy talking to you is because you talk to so many organizations, right? And so many people.
Yeah.
We're 24 slides, so I talk to many organizations. We talk about how creative material, how they create presentations, and that leads to productivity gains and all of that kind of stuff. But it's not the same capacity as talking to many different organizations about how do we actually become better at what we do. If you look at some of the problems that you most see out there, like if you look at some of those CEOs and what is the difficulties that they're working with, what is the ones that is most prevalent where you would say, across many of the companies you worked, I'm not talking just 2022 or 2023, but also in your head, like what is the most common thing where you experience that CEOs is like, this is something that's really hard. This is something that you see many are struggling with, the problem. Yeah. if you could talk a little bit about that. I always like to learn about those types of issues.
It's a fascinating question, because I think for a lot of businesses there's a conflict. There's a conflict with their ambition of what they want to achieve, right? So whether you're an owner or operator of a business, or whether you're a CEO of a publicly traded company, there's a conflict between wanting to be human, right?
Yes.
Versus the mechanical reality of what they're being measured by, which is financial performance. And there's an incongruency there quite often that I think creates massive conflict between what they want to achieve from a numbers perspective versus how human they want to be relative to the people that they are responsible for, and the duty of care that they should have for their employees. And I think for a lot of businesses, that's a real struggle, right? Because
it's fascinating.
I'm going to tell you a story where I faced into it. Not a pretty story, by the way. So I was managing director of a business. I'm not going to say who it was, because there will people who will be harmed, and I didn't write a book called Spare, but I was MD of one division within a larger organization, and I ran the London business. And I contributed about 20% for the total revenue of this organization, which was operating at about 110 million. And I had a manufacturing facility as part of my remit, which employed 125 people. Now, it was very evident when I joined the business that the operating loss to the business for my division was not only contributing about £1 million worth of negative contribution. It was because the facility that we were responsible for was not fit for purpose. So we had to reshape the business. So we knew we had to do something with that manufacturing site. So the group of leaders of this business recognized that we were going to have to shift it. It got to the point where the chairman of the company came to me and said, okay, we're going to dismantle this operation. We're going to close it down. We're going to move the business to a couple of other sites that we've got. And he came to me about 3 weeks before Christmas, and he said, I want you to cull 125 of those people before Christmas.
Oh, that is just bad. Right before Christmas, saying, hey,
yeah,
sorry.
And I said no. And I went to battle around this, because I said, fundamentally, we have to manage these people appropriately. Some of these people have been with the organization a really long time. There's no way I'm going to go in there and hand them their slips and say that we're going to cut it down. We knew we had to change the business, but the chairman of this company, that was the only thing he cared about, was the top line. His pocket, his money, didn't care about the well-being or the integrity of the business in terms of how it handled this situation. And that created a moment which started a domino effect, where I suddenly realized that this organization cared nothing more than their P&L, without giving good regard to their people. And I actually ended up getting fired over it. But I fundamentally
That's probably a good thing, right?
I rejected the idea of doing it. I said, there's no way I'm going to do it. This is not going to happen under my watch. You know, if you want to do it, then you send the message from you. He wouldn't do it. He was expecting me to do it. I did not do it. It happened. The transition happened after Christmas, but I ended up getting fired. I was okay with that. But
yeah, but don't you think you would probably have quit either way, right? So
yeah, probably, because culturally it was the wrong thing.
But you say that story is. I think that's a really interesting story, right? And we know there's a lot of business people like that. But you tell me that a lot of the clients that you work with actually struggle with this. It doesn't seem like that chairman was struggling with it. But I think it's fascinating because I recognize that completely with myself, and I think it's really hard, to be honest. On one end, we're running a profitable business. We want the business to grow. We have a responsibility as stewards of the business to give it the best possible, baseline to grow.
Yeah.
So we have to make decisions that is not, should not be focused only on people. We have a responsibility for the business. On the other end, we also have a responsibility for our people. In our company, the people goes first. So it's for us, that's not, I would say, quite the same issue, but there is still that balance of saying, if you go full on, it's all about the people. I don't think you end up having a really profitable, successful business. If you go full in, I just only care about the money. You might be able to build a good business, but I don't think in the long term you're going to build something that's special. So it's somewhere in between there, right? But when you talk to CEOs and you hear them struggle about, I know there's some things here that we should probably do, but I struggle with it because I know that it's difficult for the people. Why do you think they end up in that? Is it because it's, talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I think what's happened over the last, I'm going to say, 30 years. There was very much a very different mindset, in the 80s about how organizations should operate.
The corporate radar.
Right. Exactly. And I think the perspective has shifted. And so when you hear, I love Simon Sinek. I'm sure you know who he is.
Yes.
Leaders Eat Last, is a great book of his. And I think culturally within organizations, what they've recognized is that, yes, there is always, there is a mandate, quote unquote, to operate profitably and to make sure that, that the business, the integrity of the business is built on, firstly and foremost, making sure that you're getting the right culture in place, because the right culture will enable productivity, and productivity will allow growth, and then you can better serve your customers. And I think there's been a mindset shift in a lot of leadership to say, actually, you know what, we don't have to be these alpha males or these alpha females who have zero empathy, zero emotional commitment to their people, because all they're driving towards is the top line, the bottom line. I think it's now become accepted practice that it's okay to have a high level of emotional quotient, emotional intelligence in the business.
Kind.
Right. To be able to get to that level of performance. And that's relatively new in leadership in the last, I would say even the last 15 years, that's become a dimension, a characteristic of good leadership, as opposed to being the alpha who doesn't care about anything other than that metric. And that's definitely shifted. So because of the nature of an individual who has a high, I fundamentally believed at one point in time that that I'd never met anybody else stupider than myself.
and then you met me.
Well,
Here we go.
I wasn't going to tell you that, Robert. Right? And yet I always, I didn't believe in my own intelligence, but I always believed that I had a very high EQ. And I think this is where it becomes really interesting for leadership, right? Because more and more leaders do have high EQ. And so therefore their propensity is to be naturally more interested in people and the well-being of people. And that's where this conflict comes, right?
Where do you think, how do you think that changed? I'm wondering, because it's, I buy all of it, and we see the business benefit from the way that we view it, or that I view it, is always like, you have, as a leader, so often when you are presented with choices, there's the right choice and the easy choice, right? And that's like, that happens so often. And I found that what me and my partner Tobias has been doing all the ways, since the dawn of time, because we are primarily motivated by doing something special for our people. And in order to do that, we need a profitable business that accumulates capital. It's always been, it's not easy, but it's always been, we do the right choice every time. And it seems now, when we've been doing it for, several years, that the accumulation of doing that is what leads you to have a really strong culture. It's what leads you to be able to have a strong brand. It's what enables us to hire really nice people, keep them around for a long time. And then that turns into a real business advantage in the market, because it just means that we can do stuff that many organizations cannot. Higher quality, more motivated employees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot of the metrics fundamentally in a business that have changed. Why do you think it's that realization that have kind of shifted that journey across some of the customers that you work with? Or do you think something else is in play?
I think probably just on a very basic human level, which when you actually just look at it pragmatically, right, just pure pragmatics, it's every organization sits there and says predominantly, our real asset is our people, which is true, right? And I think even that term is a bit disgusting, right?
It's pure Taylorism, right? It's like human resources, right? It's like we need to maximize our assets / resources.
Yeah.
It's almost demeaning, I would say, right?
Oh, totally. And agency networks would often use that, like, our best assets are our people, because that's all they have. Well, hang on. Actually, it's much more than that. It's much more than that, and yet they recognize that in order for them to be productive organizations, in order for them to be an organization that is a destination organization, an organization that they need to attract the best people to build on the culture, to build on the value that they bring to their customers. And they suddenly recognize that actually it's no longer, it was always, Sachs, Goldman Sachs used to be, the destination business, right? For anyone coming out of business school, right? And then people started realizing, well, hang on, actually there's more to it than just getting some blue chip credentials behind you. Actually, we want to have, as individuals, we want a culture. We want a place that's interesting to work. We want to work in environments which are creative, and all those sort of dimensions that I think are now acceptable in business, that then recognizes that in order for you to become a destination business, or a place where you can attract good people, you have to operate from a completely different set of principles. I think that, is it a chicken and egg thing? I don't know. I think it's
I actually don't. Do you know where that came from? Because I'm just now that you say that, I'm sitting here. I recall in Denmark, it's the same experience for some of the, you could call them the great blue chip companies like IBM in Denmark. We had Maersk or have Maersk.
yeah, yeah,
And all of these really big brand names, they were used to just harvesting the cream of the crops of the business schools, right? It's like if you were top of class, you applied to Maersk. And they didn't have to do anything to attract any employees. They could treat them whatever they want them because everyone wanted to go there. And then I think it's around probably 15 years ago that I really started hearing that they could see that it was not automatic anymore. People were that was beginning, and it has only accelerated since, right? That the amount of weight young people placed on the fact that it was a well-known brand was just declining. And that you were Maersk or that you were Goldman Sachs, all of a sudden is like the weight that carried, decreased, and then actually what they delivered and what they stood for as an organization increased. But I don't have an inflection point where I can kind of say, this is where it started. Do you think it's a generational thing, that it's just like there was a generation that because of the internet or that demand just started to change?
I mean, it's definitely a generational thing, and I've got to believe that, and there'll be experts out there who will know this for sure. But the youngest of the baby boomers, right?
I just say no. Baby boomers, Gen Zs, millennials. I don't even know what my own generation is called. I am completely.
Well, you're a millennial for sure.
Okay.
Right. So
82.
But I think millennials, started looking at the kind of behaviors and the attitudes that baby boomers had around the work environment. And I think when they started making that evaluation and that baby boomers were driven, I mean, baby boomers, you can probably blame a lot for in terms of, this corporate arrogance that sat out there, the Enrons of the world, right?
Yes.
all these diabolical, greedy scenarios that happened. I think millennials started recognizing, going, hang on, actually, this is not good business as a whole. And neither do I want to work, the 70, 80, 100-hour weeks just to get an advancement, especially when the expectation from above says this is what you need to do in order to get a career progression. And when they started to recognize that actually the differential between, if money is a measure of happiness, which we know it's not, right? But actually, there are thresholds that's kind of been recognized, that even if you were to make double your salary and you're miserable, you're not going to actually be any happier just because you're making more money. And so I think millennials were beginning to recognize that actually we just need enough in order to meet our needs, but actually our needs are greater than just the monetary value. And so if we're going to go in and work for an organization like a Goldman Sachs, where the demands are heavy, the expectations are unrealistic, the rewards aren't necessarily there, right? All of a sudden,
financial rewards are there, right? I think it's that's true. Depending on where you end up in the hierarchy before you get out of there, right? Yeah.
But I think people started to recognize that the importance of other things beyond just money, when compared to the generation before them, where they were driven by nothing but money. Like, let's just face it, that's what baby boomers predominantly were, right? It was all about money. It was all about advancement. It was all about greed. I mean, it's the classic Wolf of Wall Street, right? Or the Gordon Gekko of the world, right? I mean, and they're saying, and at what
the
expense?
worst manifestation of capitalism.
Right.
But it's actually it's quite funny, because if you go back to like the post-war years, like the 40s, 50s, 60s, those type of years, and you look at how CEOs spoke about companies, they were talking about stakeholder capitalism. It was pre the late 70s, 80s with the corporate radar. CEOs are much more about, it's about our employees, it's about our communities, and it's also about the shareholder. So it feels like we almost just come full circle, right? Then in comes the corporate radar, and they were like, it's not about the employees, it's not about communities, it's not about the environment, it's only about profit maximization for the shareholder. And then it seems like that just kind of played itself out, and then at some point, it became, I would say, evident for probably, like you say, the millennials, that this is not sustainable, something needs to change, and then you kind of end up back at something that is stakeholder, right? Capitalism.
Yeah. Again, it is complex, because I would also say I put a LinkedIn post up about it today. Funnily enough, there's a difference between playing a finite game and an infinite game.
Yes.
Right. And I think sort of. Businesses at the early part of the 20th century, I think their mindset was very much about the infinite game. It was always about building, and that building was never necessarily at the compromise of people or its customers. It was about how do we play this out, and certainly the way, I mean, if you think about it, why does a privately held business need to have a quarterly report?
It does not.
It does not.
If you're privately held, they do not.
Right. And yet the mindset for a lot of businesses still have that kind of view, because actually, again, back in the 70s and 80s, when this was all shifting, and suddenly, the world around operating businesses became a finite game to getting maximized shareholder value, was all driven around finite measures within a finite period of time. And all trying to be able to win share of market in a finite period of time. And that kind of changed the focus of how businesses operate. And then as more and more businesses became fueled by private equity, by VC, VC capital coming in, again, the mechanics all driven by a finite mindset. And that by itself has bearing on so many things in terms of corporate conduct. And in some cases, and we've seen this in the last few months, right, where a lot of businesses, for the ambition of growth and maybe some greed, sold themselves out to a lot of venture capital, and all of a sudden, the conditions have changed dramatically because of the environment we're in at the moment.
Yes,
and suddenly that's a compromise. That's a compromise for perhaps the mission that owner started out with, in terms of they wanted to do something quote unquote good. Not that was necessarily a do good business, but they wanted to do something good because they saw an opportunity. Then they go out, and because they've got that ambition, they've got that drive, and they bring in that VC, and all of a sudden, a friend of mine actually recently just left as the CEO of a company. Mm-hmm. They were bought out by a big network. And again, they kind of sold themselves to the devil, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden, the reasons that they were doing what they were doing, even though they thought they could do more of it because they were going to get this investor in, and it happens so often, it's not an unusual story, that, again, the cultural shift that is mandated, not because of desire, but because of the expectations that that external influence, that external money suddenly has on the business, ruins that vision, ruins that mission, which was much more than just money.
It's so common. Yeah, it's so common. I remember I read an interview, not read an interview, I heard an interview with a girl that had, you know the company Body Shop? Like this retail, yeah. So Body Shop was sold to L'Oreal many years ago, right?
Yeah.
And basically, that was exactly the story. You know, she had a very real purpose with Body Shop, the way she treated her employees, what she tried to do to the beauty industry, all of that stuff. And when L'Oreal purchased the company, they basically said, we're going to expand that, we're going to make it better. You know, they gave her all of the promises, everything to close the deal. And then once she was gobbled up by L'Oreal, it just changed. Like just tiny steps over time. It's like, we'll just remove these benefits for your employees. You know, we'll just change this. We'll just put this product in. And she also ended up leaving. And I've seen that so many times. I think it's interesting, but it's actually something that I had a friend at a dinner some time back who asked me, you know, what do you want with 24 slides? What's the goal? Do you want an IPO or do you want to? And I was like, no, you know, we just want to own it forever. And he was like, why? Like, don't you? And I could see he was completely couldn't understand. And I said, you know, let's say we IPO it. Let's say we build it up, we IPO it. You know, we earn $100 million or something. Then what? I was like, what? You want me to buy a boat? And then, I mean, it's like, well, then what am I going to do? It's like, then what I would do is I would search for something that would give my life purpose outside of having my family and the kids and my hobbies, you know. So, and that would lead me to building something like 24 slides either way. So it's like, why sell it? Why not just keep it and try to do something special and then, you know, improve, in our case, improve the way people work in emerging markets, or, you know, change the world, right, in a positive way. But I think it's a fascinating thing. I think there's a lot. I know there's a lot of founders who ended up selling their companies to larger organizations that have regretted it afterwards, right?
Oh,
but it can also be difficult if you don't have like a clear path forward. I read the book by Tony Fadell who built Nest. They sold to Google. It was exactly the same story. Google basically told him, we're going to do anything. It's going to be perfect. And then they just, you know, and he was out of there really fairly quickly. But what he basically said is, he basically think that they would have been steamrolled. Had Nest stayed on their own outside of Google, either Google, Amazon, Apple would probably have, you know, steamrolled them and just, they wouldn't have been able to compete. So you also have those kind of, where you need to kind of make that decision. I think Slack is another example, purchased by Salesforce, right?
Yeah.
They probably did it because Microsoft Teams were kind of really killing them in the marketplace, and it was like they needed to be in a big organization to fight that.
Yeah, and again, therein lies a conflict, right? And this comes back to this whole dimension. And I mean, ultimately, I think it comes back to the individual and what they prioritize or what they philosophically believe in, maybe as a kind of a human ethos about where priority should be placed. And I think if fundamentally the motivation for, let's say if Nest hadn't done what they'd done with Google, actually maybe the dream would have died. And actually the other view to it is that if the dream had died because they didn't align themselves with Google, then actually the well-being of many other people could be compromised.
Yes, and that is, yeah.
And so you're in this struggle. I'm going to give you another personal story. So before I got into partnership with Chris, I was MD of a retail technology company. You actually know them because you spoke with one of them up in Chicago, and I was confronted as the MD of the business. I was confronted again. New York were changing the financial goalposts regularly. We were a joint venture, and I was responsible for the UK market or the European market. But we started from a blank sheet of paper. The US organization had been going for a couple of decades. We started from a blank sheet of paper, and so we had to grow from zero to get to obviously profitability and to get to sustainability. But the goalposts in New York kept moving. And after about 4.5, 5 years of doing what we were doing, they were never satisfied. And the pressure from, not so much on me, but the pressure that was coming down from the CEO, from her board, was ridiculous. So I made an evaluation that I said I could do a couple of things in order to get the business in the UK where they wanted it to. We needed to change the narrative to the organization in New York. We needed to control that conversation. So I put 5 strategies on the table in order to figure out how would we restructure it in order to get it to a place where New York would be happy with it. But my mandate, my fundamental mandate for what I'd helped build was to protect my people and protect the clients that we'd brought in. And in the process, I knew I was going to write myself out of a job, which is basically what happened. I put these strategies on the table because I wanted to preserve what we had built.
Yeah.
But mostly I was concerned about preserving the people that we had brought into the business, because we'll call it my sacrifice, if that's how we want to look at it, was insignificant compared to the sacrifice of the others had we not shifted this. And if New York suddenly came down and said, okay, we've got to close the business because it's not meeting the expectations.
Got it.
And again, I think it comes back to what you fundamentally believe is the right thing to be doing. And if it's not about people, then I'm not sure what it's about.
You did the right thing, right? There was the easy choice and the right choice. You went with the right.
I mean, I was a little bit resentful of it because I thought they might rescue me, but they didn't. Right?
Well, that's okay. You can be resentful. That's fine. Meditate on it. You'll get over it.
Yeah. I did, because actually I've ended up in a much, much better place in terms of my own satisfaction, because now I genuinely, work with organizations and people that is transformational for them, and that the reward in that is huge.
Yeah,
it's again, it's back to the people.
I want to switch gear a little bit. Speaking about people, so I have a theory that I want your input on.
Theory.
And it is aligned of what we've talked about so far, right? So what I feel has happened ever since basically the millennials started really questioning, what happened with the Raiders Norway back in the 80s, 90s, and to a large degree in the zeros, is that more and more it's become more and more important to be more and more purpose-driven and more people-focused as a company in order to attract talent and in order to have the right people so you can run a solid business. So basically, in order to run a proper, well-run company, you need great people. In order to get great people, you need to have these elements as a part of it. If you look at what happened with the pandemic, one of the things that I think has happened, and that is where your input comes in. If you looked at the statistics before, they talk about the great resignation afterwards, right? That many people have really challenging a lot of fundamental things. Basically, the pandemic hit, everyone had to work from home, and it, overnight showed a lot of people, I believe, that work does not have to suck. I think before there's a lot of people who just fundamentally didn't like work. And then because you have this big shift in how work can be done, basically how value can be created, I think we're going to have a huge shift where people is to an even higher degree. I mean, it was already there that people started really challenging organizations as to what should an organization be and provide for me as a person to want to work for you. But I really think that was supercharged by the pandemic to a point where the demand on organizations, on proving to employees why they should spend their resources in an organization has just skyrocketed. And my theory is this: I believe if we go 5 to 10 years into the future and we look back, the companies that we would look at that point in time, being the innovators, the super successful companies, will actually not necessarily be the companies who are best at applying AI or blockchain or any new technological shift. I have a feeling that the ones we're going to be talking about will all have that commonality, that they have transitioned to what many call people-first businesses. Do you think that's accurate? That is actually going to be like a significant shift in the way that you work?
I'm not struggling. I'm not struggling with the concept. When as you say, when you kind of analyze what has gone on, and all of a sudden, the recognition is that the employee has much more influence, much more stake in the game, because they recognize it's always going to be a bit of a supply and demand thing, right?
That's going to be interesting to follow now, right?
Right. And so there's a little bit of this going on, this supply and demand. But equally, even if demand is higher than the supply, let's look at the other way around. Let's assume that demand is lower than supply. I think people have still recognized that actually they value themselves more as an individual than as an employee. And therefore, the conditions of how employment works now going forward is very different than it was even 2-3 years ago. And that's the fundamental shift, right? Because when demand for resource is higher and there's no resource available, yeah, of course you've got much more control and influence over your terms and conditions of work. But when there was the Industrial Revolution, right? Mm-hmm. And suddenly there was a new way of working and a new opportunity for working. People said, you know what, do I really want to work in the fields any longer and be wet and cold and miserable all the time and dirty and smelling like, no, I think I'm going to go into the nice, comfortable, working, sheltered environment of a well, yeah, right?
Of the industrial
right.
manufacturing line.
Yeah. But
it's true. It's true. Compared to being in the fields, I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah.
So, conditions, broader conditions, changed and evolved, and therefore, people had a different kind of level of consideration of what was more suitable for them. So the pandemic absolutely did that, right? It made them reevaluate so many things in their lives beyond just, where they went to earn an income. Mm-hmm. And that's a momentum that's now in play. How it ends up, goodness knows. But that has definitely happened. And I think,
do you see that with the clients that you work with? How are they reacting to that? Do they kind of embrace it and say, here's a lot of opportunities that we can use to become better and win in the marketplace? Or do they have more of a, we would like to go back to where we were before and kind of work from that perspective?
No, I think there are more organizations out there recognizing that in order to be relevant to their workforce, they have to be a lot more agile. They have to be a lot more flexible. They have to be a lot more non-restrictive or unrestrictive, whatever the right grammar is, in how they engage with their employees, because that has shifted. And there are few organizations that I think, certainly from my client base, I don't think anyone has mandated that everybody has to be back in the workplace full time, because actually they don't recognize it as necessarily any more, maybe even less productive. So there's definitely this momentum that is picked up in terms of adoption of more flexible environments. Not because necessarily a corporation wants it to be that way, but they recognize that it's what their employees want.
Do they then end up in like a hybrid model? Because this is one of the fascinating things, right? We've been talking a lot about it because we're very culture driven. And a big part of having a really strong culture is those connections you build face to face. And on one end of the spectrum, you have, the Apples, the Elons, the Tony Hsiehs of the world, which have built these really big, elaborate office spaces in order to facilitate a place where you have a lot of casual interactions, right? So one of the donut that Apple built, this humongously big headquarters, it is built with the purpose of making sure that people from different departments have casual small conversations. So, where the water coolers are situated, where the toilets are, where the canteens are, all of that stuff is made to deliberate, facilitate that people from different functions, randomly have conversations with each other, because that is just super, super valuable for a large organization to kind of break up the departmental thinking, cross-domain knowledge and all of that stuff. And there's so many studies that just shows that is incredibly valuable. Then on the other hand, of course, you have fully remote organizations, right? And if you manage to create a team where it's like you are working fully remote, everyone have full flexibility, you work when you want, how you want, you can have really, really high levels of productivity. And I just, for us personally at 24 Slides, I think it's really difficult, and it's a fascinating time to kind of find out how do we kind of marry the best of both worlds, right? How can you kind of try to do both?
Well, I think again it comes kind of back to culture, right? So Envision was probably one of the first work from anywhere organizations. It started out with that mission in mind, and by, I don't know, must have been 5 years ago, they'd already scaled to 1,200 people working all across the globe, didn't have a single physical zone for any employee. And they said fundamentally their culture was driven by that recognition. That was the essence of their culture. And of course, culture is defined by how people come together, not because you've got a prescriptive view. It's actually how people want to work together. So they created that culture based on bringing people together who wanted to work in that way.
But they still meet up, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So they would still have like most of the ones.
Oh,
I
yeah,
know,
yeah. They would congregate whenever they needed to in certain zones, and I don't think that will ever shift. But it doesn't, and without question, whether you're a large organization like Apple, or I work from my office here, but I go into my office in Twickenham once a week, and we're all together. So we still do that. We still, and it's for that very reason. Like we need that banter, we need that social interaction, we need that opportunity of casual conversation around whatever. Yeah, I don't think that's ever. Well, I mean, who knows?
Yeah,
but
but have you agreed on one day? Then
we're still social creatures, right? So we still need that.
Have you agreed then, like every Tuesday or every Thursday or every whatever day, that's the day where everyone comes in?
Not officially, but it's kind of amalgamated to a Monday, because I don't do any training or customer interactions on a Monday, and so the rest of the team actually makes sense that we're all there. It kind of just by kind of obvious happenstance that we should be there on Mondays. Now my daughter works for Hearst Media, and in her team, they are in every Wednesday. That's not negotiable.
Okay.
So every Wednesday they are as a team, which I think is great, and she loves it. When she's in, she absolutely loves it for that very reason. Of all that social interaction, that casual conversation, that unstructured conversation, that non-deliberate conversation, and they get a lot done. But she's not restricted. She can go in. She could work there 5 days a week if she wants to. But you have to be there on a Wednesday.
I like that. We have something. The last time we had lockdown in Denmark, I now moved to the US, but I was in the main office in Denmark, right? And it kind of changed from saying before I always went to the office, and everyone in our office went to the office. So if we've always had complete flexibility, I could just work from home whenever I wanted to. I can work from anywhere. We always had that. But kind of the default was always like, okay, if I don't have anything that I want to focus on and stay at home and have my focus time, or the plumber comes by, I would still go to the office because I like my people, right? But then that switched, so the default changed to say, my default is no longer I go to the office. The default was like I work from home, and then I go to the office if I have something special I need to go to. And then what happened is I would go to the office, and then I would come in, and there would be one other person or two other persons, right? I was standing there by myself, and you'd be like, why go to the office? So it became this negative spiral of then people just never coming in. And I remember I took my sales team, I said, hey, guys, I miss you. People, I want to hang out more, please. How do you feel? And they luckily felt the same way, right? So we actually did something similar. We just agreed that we still have flexibility, so there's no days that is off the table. I mean, if you need new internet installed or, your kid is sick or whatever, I mean, you need that flexibility. You can still take it off. The only thing we agreed on is by default on also Wednesdays and on Thursdays and on Mondays, you can always just work from home, just write. So, on those days, if you get up in the morning, you're like, I'm working from home, just write in a Slack channel saying, hey, I'm from home today. So everyone else knows that if nobody has written, it means the team is coming in, so everyone can kind of see, are there people? Does it make sense for me to go in, or should I just stay from home as well? And that actually worked really well for that team. And then that kind of, because the sales team was the biggest team in the Copenhagen office, all of a sudden all of the other people knew, okay, so on Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays, we know that's probably going to be a lot of people, so more people started coming in, and before you knew it, it's like more and more would be there, right? So you get that social interaction. But I think it's, yeah.
I think this is not statistically evident at all, but I think it's a really interesting anecdote of another major shift that's happened as a result of this. And I think what the pandemic did, certainly very rapidly, it changed the trust relationship between the employer and the employee.
That is interesting.
Okay. Now, again, I don't have it. This is just anecdote, but so pre-pandemic,
Yes.
when someone said I'm working from home today, people are going, yeah, right.
From home.
Yeah. You're out.
Like doing your laundry, that's, a tough night yesterday, I hear.
Yeah, exactly. You had a really few too many the night before, and so
Exactly. Oh my God.
yeah. So that kind of thing, broadly speaking, there was no trust. Absolutely
I agree.
no trust, right?
Yes.
And even if there was a marginal culture of working from home, there was always a degree, I think a high degree of questioning about how productive are they really at home working, and I just don't think that there was a general level of trust. But I think that's dramatically shifted now. And it's in recognition that I think for the vast majority, 99% of the people, when they show up to work, whether it's at home or in the office, they want to do a good job. They generally want to do a good job. Yeah, there'll be a few who will try and cut the corners, and they will try and keep it, within the minimum amount of time, but they still want to do a good job. And yet, this shift that has now come about, where having a hybrid way of working, I think the trust level with the employer to the employee is very high, because they've seen that for the most part they are committed. Now,
I think it's I think it's fascinating, because I actually think many leadership teams, they still don't have that. I think they're forced to now, because they can see on the numbers that, okay, they were actually, they were productive. So you don't have the argument anymore. I can't remember the number, but I recall reading somewhere that it was like around 40% of like all US companies that installed some sort of time tracking spyware when COVID hit on employees' laptops. I remember now that I'm saying it, 40% sounds ridiculously high, but I remember I read that number and I was like, that is crazy. That, you feel you have to. But I actually think it's a really interesting, development. And one of the things that I like the most about it is the way we built our company. I remember me and Tobias, we talked about it way back when it was almost just me and him in Copenhagen. And we like to be extremely focused, right? So we both like to plan our time in a way so we could say, okay, we take the stuff that's most valuable, we clunk out a chunk of time, and then we just all distractions removed, just full effort into like executing on something that has a lot of value. And if you do that in a really good way, you can really create movement on some really valuable tasks, not using a lot of hours. We're both family people, so it's like, we basically said to each other, number of hours in the office cannot be the measurement of success of 24 Slide. Just full stop. That's not the organization we want. So that has always been kind of out the window. But then the next thing arises is then how do you measure if people create value, right? And I think that's one of the things that has happened in many companies is now it's flexible. Now it's fluid. Before, I think in many companies, the way they measured value was like, I look at employee X's chair, and if it's filled 10 hours, they create more value than if it is filled 6 hours, right? Like that was rudimentary. That was like, that's how I measure value. Whether or not they're Facebooking or doing whatever, I think in many jobs, that was kind of the way you establish, is this a person that is really good and effective? And when you can't do that anymore, you have to kind of evaluate. Then, how do people create value? Which leads to the next thing, which I think is such a healthy discussion to have, is you can then take whatever any given employee is working on, a set of tasks, and then you can say what of those tasks are high value tasks and what of those tasks are lower value tasks. And it starts an organizational looking into, are we spending our people's time on the right things? And luckily for us, I think that's one of the reasons that we've been growing. I mean, we do presentations, right? You send us ugly slides, we send really nice slides back. And that's one of those tasks. If you're a knowledge worker, in many cases that it just doesn't make sense. It's all the way down there with like, paying invoices, travel reports and stuff like that. It's like it doesn't make sense for a PhD to be sitting and spending a lot of time on it. So it's one of those things where I actually think a lot of companies now have started look at these programs where presentation is one aspect, but a lot of these different support tools where you say, I have a group of people. They're really good at doing something. Let's say it's salespeople or it's marketing people or it's researchers, right? If I'm a pharma company and I have researchers, they should be doing researching. They should be coming up with compounds. They should not be doing like travel expenses. They should not be doing presentations. They should not be doing, this type of material, all of these different tasks. Can I create a system where I actually help them to take the more lower value stuff out and then focus on the more higher value stuff? Is that something you see as well? Because I have this, if I was the CEO of a company, that type of thinking, when I look at how I spend my resources the best way and how do I grow my business, would lead to some of that. Is that something you also see from when you talk to your clients?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a growing recognition on a couple of fronts, which intertwines this concept, which is productivity for some businesses were like, well, if we can get one person doing 2 or 3 different jobs, isn't that clever of us? Right. How effective are we? Or not effective, but how efficient? How efficient? We got 3 different roles, and without question, if you really look at it, and again, this is the distinction between, are you playing this kind of silly finite game? There's no way you're going to get efficient, effective productivity from an individual trying to multitask against different dimensions of requiring different expertise. And yet organizations would go, oh, this is clever of us. Let's get one person doing 3 different functions. And so now what's happening, I think more and more businesses are looking at, do they have, if you look at disciplines requiring very specific competencies and very specific expertise, They're saying, actually, in order for us to be operating in this way, we need 3 full-time equivalents of that expertise in the business in order to get the most efficiency and therefore the most effectiveness out of those 3 full-time equivalents. Let's make sure that we're putting the right emphasis in that right channel. Because the other thing has been now recognized, and this is actually just, we've all known this, but it's now been proven scientifically. I read an article that was put out by one of the universities in New Zealand, that we are not good multitaskers.
We can multitask, right?
No, we cannot. Yeah.
The mind can only hold one thought. As I read it, it's like you can only hold one thought. So what people think is multitasking is actually just really rapid shifting between 2 tasks, which is just, there's always a switching cost. So it's it's like as soon as you accept you can only hold one thought, it's multitasking makes no sense.
Right. So the recognition now is that if we need to be efficient and effective, because you can't. I suppose you could be effective without being efficient. But if at the end of the day we want to get the best results, then we've got to make sure that people are actually channeled with singularity and focus. Now,
I agree.
There's a human condition that says actually what we want is variety. So I get bored really easily. But
how do you do that then? What's your tool set to kind of, on one end, you know that if you hunker down and focus, you're most effective, you create most value. Yeah. On the other end, you get bored really easily. How do you manage that?
Well, you know what I do, and I don't know if I have it here, is I'm sure I had it printed out somewhere. What I do is I create a behavioral activity list every day.
So you write out every day what you are going to do on the day?
Yeah. I was trying to see if I had it. It's actually on my other screen here. And so I have a sheet that I write out. So after our chat today, I'm going to go off and do my activity tomorrow is Saturday, so I won't do it. I'll do it Sunday night.
Relax.
Yeah, exactly.
Hang out with the family.
Exactly. But no, every day, against my 2 primary goals that I have my list of activities that I write down. Mm-hmm. And I then tick them off as I go to give me that focus. But actually, it's also to give me the other important thing, which is dopamine.
Yes. The dopamine check mark, right? It feels nice. Yeah. It's like completely. Done. It's like it's magic. Yeah, nice.
I had a one of my tasks today was to do a kind of a recapture call with a past client, somebody I've been trying to get hold of for quite some time. And funnily enough, I'd sent them a couple of messages. One had previously said I was going to call them on Tuesday, which I did. Mm-hmm. Got their voicemail. And in that voicemail, I said, I'm going to call you on Friday. So on my list to do today was to call Matt. And Matt picks up, and I kind of went into this call with this mindset he was going to pick up. And I said, Matt, it's Justin from Sandler. And he goes, I know, I saw the number on the phone. And I said, you still picked up?
And such a surprise.
Such a surprise, exactly. But for me, it was like, okay, tick mark, yeah, done, great, and
Yes.
and actually, what we forget, and I think this is actually important for everybody, is that we often wait for the big crescendo, the big result,
Yes.
the big achievement.
Fat
But
frog.
actually, the reward is in the pursuit, not the end result itself.
Yeah.
And so for me to keep focus and to keep interested in what I'm doing is that if by having this defined list that I type out, then I print out because I like seeing it there in physical, even though it's a Word document. These are the activities I need to do today. And that actually drives momentum. It drives motivation and reward because of achieving that. And that's how I make sure that I'm focused on what I'm doing, because I also know that I will feel good about having achieved it. But you can only do that if you have it written out, I think. And that's my little trick.
I agree. I don't write it out. I actually started writing it out now because I got myself a Remarkable. Do you know the Remarkable?
Oh, I'm jealous.
It started with one person in the team having it, and they were like, "Oh, this is so nice." And then a couple of other people got it, and every single person I've ever met that have one, they are exactly. They are literally. I mean, it's almost like they're hugging it, right? And then I got one, and it's absolute magic, and it's quite interesting because it's such a simple product. It's just there's nothing fancy about it, but what
I thought you were going to
does.
send one to me for Christmas. Is it on this way?
So, so what I wanted to say is, it combines the love of and the way handwriting is special, right? There's something about writing stuff out in hand.
Yep.
And basically, what it combines is that with storing and searching. And that's basically all it does. But that is absolutely magical to me. That is like, before I had all of these black hat books, right, with just like page after page after page. And when I needed to find something, it could never be done. Exactly. Oh my God, those ones. I have like freaking cupboards of them. And I can't use it for anything.
Yeah.
But on this one, all of a sudden, I kind of get the same value as writing in one of those ones.
Yeah.
But I can actually search it. I go into the app and I search, and it can recognize my handwriting, turn it into something that's searchable, and it can show me my notes. And that was like, wow, it's insane. Yeah, so I kind of do the same thing. I am pretty advanced on to-do lists because it's what I've been using for so long time to just say, for me, it's extremely important, like just getting all of my information out of my head onto something, like get an overview. Right, so just collecting everything and getting everything in one place, so I can say now I have everything in one place, and then I can kind of go over it, and then I can say, what is most important according to certain criteria. So for me, it's always what adds the most long-term business value for 24 slides, and then I circle those ones and I put them to the top, right, and then at some point after doing that, you end up with a list, and most valuable stuff at the top, and then all the way down. And then I know that I can then shut off everything, and I can do task 1 and click it off. Task 2, click it off. And that's
Nice.
what I found is the most effective way for me to kind of... And then what you find is that there is stuff that's just never getting up there. Like it's a long to-do list, and I just accept it will never be done. But that's the system in place to kind of just say, I always try to, do the most impactful things. Yeah, so that's what I use. Another question that I think is, I won't say I struggle with it because I think we're actually doing really good at 24 slides, but I would like your input on it. How do organizations motivate salespeople? The best, in your opinion.
You want a simple answer?
If you can, yeah. I think that would be really nice. Do you have one?
Simply, they don't.
Nice.
You can't. I mean, and this is a fundamental. This is a fundamental thing that we look at when we're working with our customers, and specifically when we're working with our customers when they're hiring salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not wired to be self-motivated, you can't motivate anybody, right? An individual can only motivate themselves. And so if you look at all the psychology, if you look at all the reasons for people doing what they do it for their own reasons, not for someone else's, right? So fundamentally, for the basis of that question, can you motivate somebody to do something? No, you can't. They have to want to do it. So you can perhaps shift an interest by rewarding them in a particular way. But if they're not motivated, if they're not driven for an ambition because they understand themselves, which is difficult because only 15% of people actually are self-aware.
Mm-hmm.
But most people know what they're driven by. You fundamentally cannot shift somebody to become more motivated based on your terms, on how you want to motivate them. They have to be motivated. Now, yes, you have to make sure that your sales team are aligned to what the ambition is.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the success of a good sales leader will create a link between what the salesperson is personally motivated by and what the sales organization is motivated by. And if you create that link, then you've got a greater chance of success with that salesperson.
But wouldn't that count as motivating somebody? Because in my head, that's when I say, I totally understand what you're saying with it's really hard to change the inner drive of a person as an organization. I agree that's almost impossible. What I do think you can do, though, is you can create an environment where people who are not aware of what is actually the inner drive, I find a lot of people is confused about, what is it I want? What do I want in 3 years, 5 years? I'm dumbfounded by how many people, when I made it a habit a couple of years ago to ask, people I have good relationships with, I just say, imagine you are 90 years old. I changed it to 110 now because I think we will live longer, right? But imagine you're at the very end of your life and you look back through your life. What would have to happen between now and that point for you to be able to look at yourself and say, God damn, that was a great life? And I find it fascinating how many people just gives me a complete blank stare back. They're like, never thought about it. So I do think.
Well, I was just going to say, having that introspective view is tough for a lot of people. And so,
but don't you think you can create an organization where you kind of I don't believe you can force it, but you can create an environment where you encourage it and where you help people to kind of find it.
Yeah, but it's driven.
And then hopefully it's aligned then with.
Well, first off, there's no strategy in hope, right? So I think if your corporate mission is defined, if your culture is defined, and people buy into your mission and they buy into the culture, then they're going to join you because they're motivated towards those things.
Yes.
But if you hire somebody, if you hire salespeople who doesn't give a damn about what you do as a business and they don't care about your culture, and maybe they're driven by greed, maybe they'll be successful. But if they don't even have that driver of greed, then they're just not going to get to where you want them to get to. So why would you hire them? So my point being is that, yeah, you've got to create the conditions which reinforces that innate, what I would call intuitive motivation, right? You've got to have that. Maybe intuitive is not the right word. Maybe it's more
intrinsic, right? Isn't that what intrinsic?
Yeah, better word. Intrinsic motivation. You have to have that already. You really do. Now, for some people, it's not as obvious. But to get them to sit down and go, okay, this is not an exercise. If you haven't done the exercise, it's going to take time. But what are your, as you've said, what are your primary drivers? What are the things that motivate you in life? What matters to you the most in life? And most people will come up with 3 to 5. That's about it. But they'll have them. They'll have something in there about what matters to them the most.
And it's also depending on time, right? So there's also a time aspect. Some parts of their life, it's something, and then it changes over time.
Totally. But they will have them, right? And again, most organizations don't even understand what they. And I know we've had this conversation, so I know that's something that you think about. But ideally, those drivers are going to be the things that will enable someone to show up to what they do to earn their keep. That is congruent with what they're doing, because they believe that they will move themselves better towards those drivers. And for some cases, drivers and goals can be somewhat interlinked, but they don't necessarily have to be. A goal, and this is where it gets tricky, a goal will never be achieved if it's not inextricably linked to that driver or to a driver that you have.
But if we believe that the driver cannot fundamentally be changed, right? That's what I'm hearing.
Yep.
And the goal needs to be linked to that driver. Then basically what dawned on me now is that hiring becomes incredibly important. So it's like you really need to be super, super diligent about hiring people who are aligned with the purpose and where you're going. So you have those inner drivers firing in the same direction. What do you think you could... This is actually really fascinating. So from your perspective, you actually think that it's, I won't say impossible, but it's really, really hard as an organization that is not hiring the right type of people to actually create a system that could motivate people to perform at a higher level, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's, I think they have to be self-motivated.
Yeah.
And then the motivations that they're driven by are aligned to their own drivers.
Yeah.
And ideally, those drivers can be fulfilled by the employer enabling the employee to fulfill their own ambitions against those drivers.
Yeah.
And this is where a super good coach would come into play. So let's say, for argument's sake, one of the drivers that you have is that by the time you're 80, you can still run a marathon.
I'm laughing because, we haven't actually met in person. And what you don't know is I'm 250 pounds, 6'9". So there's no way I am ever going to run a marathon. I'm much more a deadlift kind of guy. Okay,
Yeah,
but either way,
but if that,
it's
if
a good
that was,
it's a good.
but if
You
that
go.
was a driver, right? If that was a driver, and it's something that generally fuels you because
Yeah.
you already do a fair amount of running and you're constantly thinking about improvement, but by the time you're 80, you still want to be in that condition to be able to run a marathon. And you're going to have some other goals along the way, then it might be a case when you're sitting down coaching your sales team and say, hey, Robert, recognize that actually, one of the things that you want to do is to run the Boston Marathon. When are you going to take the time to do that? When are you going to take the time to train? How do we help you ensure that you provide yourself the time to be able to do that? So you can work towards their own motivations as a way to facilitate what you need to do in within your own organization.
And then actually by proxy, even though the job might not necessarily be tied into their own motivations, you create an environment where by being excellent at work and performing and being a part of the team, they are part of an environment that enables them to chase their dreams. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good,
So, I mean, one of the things that we always coach our CEOs that we work with or our sales leaders is that you should always be mindful of understanding what those drivers are of your employees. And when you're coaching your team, make sure that you're acutely aware of two goals that they have, personal goals that they have at any one time.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, we always say it, people don't get out of bed to achieve someone else's plan. They typically get out of bed to achieve their own plan. And if you can create that linkage, then that's where the real driver of performance comes from, because it's then linked.
I like that. Last question. That's like such a. It's like the questions thing is like, it's so in my tongue. Even now I'm living in the US, I do it constantly. Either way. So last question. If you look at how to build an organization, and you look at having an organization that you can use to fulfill whatever purpose that organization is supposed to do. If you look at your own organization, you could also take examples of the clients you work with. What do you think is one of the most important cultural things, if you were to mention one, to have a part of the organization in order to have a place people feel is a great place to work?
What's the one thing that you feel would be imperative to have?
Yeah, it could be a cultural thing. It could be foosball table, if that's what you feel.
You know what? I think it's simply having, and maybe this sounds a bit cliche, but I think it's simply having an acknowledgement that if you come to show up to be the best you can be, and you've got the attitude to want to be the best that you can be, and we recognize that people perform differently, and people have different strengths, different weaknesses, different competencies, different drivers, as we've just talked about. But if fundamentally you believe that you're coming to work with the right attitude, not only for yourself, but for your organization, and we embrace that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a positive attitude, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
then I think recognizing that's something that we value in individuals by appreciating themselves for who they are and their own view.
How do you talk about that in your organization? How do you, how do you word that? Like that.
Again, I'm not sure that we necessarily do it consciously. I think we do it by simply acknowledging that, within a code of conduct that we have within our team, and how we, so we're in, to coin the old phrase, in pursuit of excellence. That's what drives us as a business. Chris and I are constantly talking about how do we forever improve the quality of our service to our customers.
Mm-hmm.
And that pursuit of excellence is a mindset, it's an attitude, and that, we believe, prevaricates through the business, because we talk about it all the time. And so if you're coming to show up to work in your own pursuit of your own excellence, and it contributes to what we're trying to do to our customers, then again, I don't think we've ever written it out, but that's what we talk about. So every Monday when I'm in the office, I'm sitting down with Karen and I'm going, okay, how do we make sure that our delivery to our customer is as excellent as it can be? What's the experience? And I think having that common thread, that one kind of connecting red thread that goes through the team, is understood and it's recognized. And so if we know that everybody's working towards doing their best, because they know that by doing their best, that will translate into our own pursuit of excellence for our customer, then we're happy. And then we've got that measure that they generally are on the same bandwagon that we are.
I like that. I actually didn't know that. It's, but it's in pursuit of it. The tagline on my email.
In the pursuit of excellence. I mean, it's there was a book. I can't remember who wrote it, which is where I nicked the phrase from. But I mean,
I think it's the same mindset I have in my. The tagline of my email is "Excellence is a state of mind," and I think it's kind of the same as what you described. That I think most people wake up, or most people actually, when they look at great athletes or business people, or you have a tendency to see the end game, right? So you look at Steve Jobs as this insane tycoon, or Cristiano Ronaldo being this crazy footballer, and you forget that Cristiano Ronaldo was also a 13-year-old teenager once that was a good 13-year-old footballer, but was not a world-dominating footballer like it turned out to be. And the difference between those two is that the young version decided to get up every day and to just do their best in improving. And it's actually just being 2 to 3% better than everyone else and deciding to do a little bit more every single day. And then it's the total accumulated body of work over 15 years that turned him into the greatest on the planet, right? And I think it's I talk about it all the time with my team, and it sounds like it's the same mindset that I don't want you to we don't need to reinvent the world. We just need to be like a little bit better every single day.
Marginal gains.
Yes.
Marginal gains. No, it's funny. I had a conversation with a prospect earlier today, and we were sort of just talking about why we do what we do, and we don't believe in sales training. Sales training in
sounds counterintuitive for a sales training company.
Right. No, correct. Because most people think of sales training as an event.
Yes.
right? But
yes.
but it doesn't work that way. So I said to this when they were sort of looking at how we operate, they were asking some questions, and I said, well, do you know who I mean by Novak Djokovic? Tennis player.
Most do, yeah.
Most do. I said, I think it was 2016. I think might have been 2014. But I can't remember the exact when he became number one. So let's just say it was 2014. He became world number one at whatever age he was. I said, how soon after him getting to number one did he stop training and practicing?
It's so fascinating. It's
Never, right? It's in that
never.
pursuit of excellence.
Yes.
That even though he could be seen as perfect because he got to number one, right? Yeah. He doesn't stop training. He doesn't stop being coached. He doesn't stop, doing what he's always done because he's in that pursuit of excellence. It's the same thing for, Usain Bolt, right? He trains and practice. Even he's the fastest guy in the world. He trains and practices every single day because actually there's a marginal weakness in his start. And the more he can improve that start, the better and faster he will become. It's that pursuit of excellence. And most organizations fundamentally go, well, let's do some sales training. We'll get them all motivated and excited for 2 or 3 days, and then job done. Doesn't work that way. The pursuit of excellence is a continuous improving pursuit.
Let that, my friend, be the last words of the day. That was
This
awesome.
has been fun.